Hi, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Scott Stripling. He is the provost at the Bible Seminary in Katy, Texas, and also the director of excavation for the Associates of Biblical Research. He's kind of most known to everyone as the powerhouse archaeologist at Shiloh right now, but he has a long excavation history before that, and we're going to talk about it all today. Welcome, Dr. Stripling.
Hi, Shelley. It's great to be with you today.
I should just give full disclosure. Dr. Stripling is also my professor, and I'm a student at the Bible Seminary. So I'm gonna feign
a very good one, I might say.
I'm gonna feign ignorance on some of these questions because I want everyone else to hear about all the amazing things that you've done. But thank you for talking with me today. Can we start off? Can you give a little bit of background of? I know you have a whole journey of life experience in academia, but specifically focusing to tell everyone where you've excavated and for how long and when this started.
In the Levant, Israel, Jordan, I have excavated at Tal al-Hammam in Jordan. That's about 8 kilometers northeast of the Dead Sea, at a large multi-layer site there for 6 seasons. And then 2 seasons in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount Salvage Project. I was a supervisor there for a couple of years. I excavated at Khirbet el-Maqater also. Our dig ran a total of 21 years. I was there for the second half of the dig and then became director for the last 4 years from 2013 to 2017 of the Khirbet el-Maqater dig, and that's 10 miles north of Jerusalem, the likely site of biblical Ai, and possibly New Testament Ephraim of John 11:54. And then we began the Shiloh dig. 3 seasons have already been completed. We were supposed to have done season 4 this summer, but of course we weren't able to go into the field.
So wait, what was your first year at Shiloh then?
2017. So we did 2017, 2018, 2019, and then 2020 would have been season 4. So we literally just segued. We ended Khirbet el-Maqater, and a few months later we started the Shiloh dig, which sane people don't do things like that because you're supposed to take time off to publish and gather yourself and everything. So I literally just, anytime I have a spare minute, I'm working on publications, and we're very, very close to finishing Khirbet el-Maqater publications. But I just couldn't see shutting down this finely tuned machine that we had up and running. And so the Lord opened the door to go to Shiloh, and we went right in.
And so Khirbet el-Maqater, as you said, that is most likely the biblical Ai, or it's the best candidate for biblical Ai. Can you explain to people you've spent a lot of your career in life focusing on the conquest. Before Shiloh. So assuming like the biblical literacy of our listeners is just a notch lower than yours, can you walk through how you've built your career around the conquest?
Okay, sure. And I'll also mention that we're doing some work at another conquest site, Mount Ebal, doing some research and work there, and we can weave that in. But to answer your question, how did we get into the conquest? Back in the 1950s, Kathleen Kenyon dug at Jericho and did a massive excavation there. She's a very skilled archaeologist for the time. But the bottom line is, at the end of her excavation, she felt that the evidence contradicted the biblical account. Now, Garstang, who had dug there in the 1930s, and she'd actually worked for Garstang, had found the opposite. He had found that there was a great synchronization. So when Kenyon basically announced that the archaeological evidence at Jericho contradicted the biblical account, well, the media loved that, and it just became a huge story. You know, the Bible is merely an teleological legend, and we're not supposed to take these as actual history. And that's what they began to teach. In the 1960s, Joseph Calloway went to a site called Et Tel, 10 miles north of Jerusalem, which people believed was Ai, and excavated the site and basically said, hey, there is nothing here from the period of the biblical conquest, okay? It's an early Bronze Age site, then there's a gap until the Iron Age and nothing in between there. Well, think about that, Shelley. You've got, if you lose Jericho and you lose Ai, you've lost the conquest. And if you don't have the conquest, you don't have a historical Hebrew Bible. And without that, you have nothing. there's absolutely nothing. So in that matrix is where David Livingston, who was the founder of Associates for Biblical Research, came along, and he was involved in archaeological projects and so forth. And he said, yeah, no, I don't think there's anything wrong with the Bible. Maybe there's something not adding up archaeologically, and let's dig into this a little deeper. And he began to investigate the problem of I. And that led to the formation of ABR. Livingston went back to school and earned a PhD in Syro-Palestinian archaeology, formed the organization, and began to search to see if indeed Callaway had dug the right site. Because if you're in the wrong place, the wrong time, you're guaranteed to find the wrong stuff. And so we have, through a process of time, become convinced that indeed Callaway was probably working at Eye of Abraham's day, because in Hebrew, of course, Eye just means ruin or destruction. So Ha'ai in the Hebrew Bible, the ruin. So he pitched his tents between Bethel and Ha'ai, the ruin. So it was already in ruins before Abraham even got there. It appears that the name migrated to a nearby spot. And
Which is common, right? That's not an out there.
No, there's a bunch of biblical examples of names migrating to nearby sites. To make a long story short, after Livingston worked for a number of years at Khirbet Nisya, the dig moved to Khirbet el-Makader, where we did find a very close match to what the Bible described. The archaeology lined up with it. It's just a half mile from Et-Tel. So we wrote an article, of course, tons of articles, but the one I would refer your listeners to and your viewers to would be The Problem of I Solved After 40 Years of Excavation. And they can just Google that or go to my academia.edu page and download it from there.
Because what it solved was that site had not only a late Bronze Age or a time of Joshua occupation, but it also had evidence of destruction as well.
Yes, we had, remember in the conquest, there were only 3 cities that were destroyed, Jericho, Ai, and Hatzor, because they didn't want to destroy these sites. This was their inheritance. Can you imagine how expensive it is to build a city? Infrastructure and streets and roads and fortifications. So they had very little incentive to burn a city. So one of the ones that was burned was Ai, and we did find extensive site-wide evidence of burning.
And Hatzor was already sort of established. And then you confirm Jericho with that, and then you've got 3 destructions.
Yeah. So we did extensive research at Jericho and have published widely on that, doing a reanalysis. In fact, Dr. Wood went back. He was a nuclear engineer, and he went back and earned a PhD and also in Syro-Palestinian archaeology with a dissertation in late Bronze Age pottery. And so with that newly minted PhD, he went back and took Kenyon's pottery and did a post-mortem, if you will, on it. And I think he's evidenced that in fact it was occupied at the time that the Bible says that it was. Then we addressed Khirbet el-Makader, of course, as the problem of Ai that I believe is solved. And now we're dealing with Shiloh, which is another conquest site, and Mount Ebal, which is another important conquest site. So altogether, I mean, we have a regional approach. It's not just one site, but what are we seeing regionally in that time period?
And I'm assuming it's a little unintentional that you're also just following it chronologically in the Bible. Like you've gone from the conquest cities to Shiloh. I don't know if Jerusalem's next, but you're following the chronology in the Bible.
Yeah. I know. Well, we have our eyes on some Jerusalem projects too, but it's a little trickier there because you have the modern city to deal with. But if we're able to take those 4 sites, Jericho, Ai, Mount Ebal, and Shiloh, I think we can test our hypothesis pretty well from there. And I think we have. And folks, I would refer them to my new book that's coming out in a few months by Zondervan, entitled 5 Views of the Exodus, or 5 Views on the Exodus, where I wrote chapter 1, which is the early date or the biblical date of the Exodus. And then of course there's other views, and it's kind of a neat format where writers get to rebut each other and, kind of let things air out. So it's in pre-sale right now. So if somebody wants, and I write about all of these sites in there, and so folks can pick that up.
Now, as Associates of Biblical Research, so they've come up in terms of Khirbet el-Makader and now what you're doing at Shiloh. Are they the primary institution that is doing this from a Christian perspective with Christian backing with Christian archaeologists. I don't know of any other ones that are doing this.
Well, okay, that's a good question. We dug at Khirbet Nissia for many years, and then Khirbet El Maqater, and now Shiloh. So we are evangelical and proud of it. I think we've got highly trained archaeologists and cutting edge technology. We're very active, engaged in the arena of ideas with all the latest methodology and technology. So we do have other archaeologists who are believers, and maybe their institution is also, like Southwest Baptist Theological Seminaries, just lost their program and now it's moved to Lipscomb University in Tennessee. So it's a Christian school, and those are Christian archaeologists who are working there. Maybe not as forward in their evangelicalism as we are. I've never felt the need to apologize for my faith commitments. I'm quite capable of bifurcating, this is what the evidence says, and not to read into that. So I think the answer to your question is yes in one sense, but in another sense, we have maybe 5 to 10 good Christian archaeologists who are working in the land of the Bible right now.
Right, which, as Lipscomb showed, it's hard, it's expensive to keep these programs in place, but it's important in terms of the future of biblical archaeology too.
That's right. And our goal is, of course, to raise up a generation where we'll just see an enormous impact. And Shelley, it's not that it's us and them. I mean, we're very collaborative. This morning, I've already Skyped with a colleague in Israel, and 6 o'clock this morning, I was exchanging emails with a colleague there on a collaboration that we're doing. So we're working with all the major universities in Israel, including your alma mater, Ben Gurion. So we're very collaborative, very, very interrelated. So it's not that it's, those guys are over here, we're on the same team, and we're learning from them and they're learning from us.
It's true, but I do think there's more pressure on an evangelical or Christian archaeologist to do good, to be a good scientist, to be a good researcher and publisher and all of those things. Like, it's almost just a little bit more under the microscope to show that, that you're a serious scholar as well.
Well, it's true, Shelley, but you know what? That pressure has actually turned out for our good. It has forced us to be excellent. If someone else makes a mistake, well, everybody makes mistakes. If Stripling makes a mistake, it's because I'm an evangelical,
Right.
And so
you have an agenda.
Yeah, it's sort of like at the end of the Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, many would argue the greatest novel in American history. He says that the Scarlet Letter had served its office. In other words, the purpose, it had made Hester into this tremendous human being. So what was intended for bad had actually had a positive effect. So that pressure, I would say, has forced us to be excellent, and that's a good thing.
I think there's a lot of people, coming out of in the middle of 2020 that are grabbing hold of those words and hoping it applies to all of life as well. But okay, so zooming in on Shiloh, I think this rumor is true, but is Shiloh the largest excavation going on in Israel now? How do we judge those numbers? Is that based off of volunteers or square footage or what?
Right. I think that's probably accurate, that we have the largest excavation team as far as numbers of people participating, probably not only in Israel, but in the entire Middle East. So we would have had about 200 people excavating this last summer as part of our excavation. Now, they're not all there at the same time. There's coming and going, and then we have Israeli groups that are coming in, and so there's just constant activity. But yeah, it's over the years we have grown, and part of that is the exposure that we've had, and because we've done good work. But let me tell you, when we were at Khirbet El Maqater, that was like the wild, wild west in the middle of nowhere. We didn't get a whole lot of visitors there. But, Shiloh is a high-profile site, and we're doing some really amazing stuff with our technologies and the finds that we're having. And, we've had a lot of coverage, so there's a lot of interest because I think the stakes are high. What is the relationship between archaeology and the Bible? Were these sites occupied when the Bible says that they were? Can we note the transition in the material culture from one culture to the next? These are big questions.
And are you any closer to, I mean, what everybody wants to know, it's a high profile site because of the tabernacle, because it was the home to Eli and Samuel. So what have you found? What are your best finds? And are you close to the tabernacle?
Uh, well, I'll try to be very succinct, but here's a few things after 3 seasons of excavation that stand out. We have storage rooms that appear to be lining the perimeter, the interior perimeter of the site. No other site in Israel has that. And so and they're full of storage jars. And so this seems to fit the picture you would expect for a tabernacle culture. When people brought tithes and antiquities, they couldn't go to tabernacle.org and make a secure online donation or whatever. I mean, they brought commodity. And so what do we find? Storage rooms. Other sites don't have that, in the perimeter. Some sites like Beersheba, maybe they've got 4-room houses that are lining the perimeter, but actual storage rooms, it's unique. We excavated a couple of ceramic, pomegranates, and the pomegranates about this big, that's the motif of the tabernacle. So remember the 7 sacred fruits when they come into the land. One of the 7 is the pomegranate, but only the pomegranate goes into the presence of God. And so it's a motif of the tabernacle. The high priest's garments, there's bells and pomegranates. Solomon's temple, you have 200 pomegranates that adorn Solomon's temple. And so we're finding these cultic items, altar horns in the 2019 season, 3 horns from a 4-horned altar. Well, the big word for this is verisimilitude. So it's what you would expect to find. We're finding in the material culture what you would expect to find if indeed there was a sacrificial system. We have a massive amount of bone, Shelley, that's there. And we analyze all of this bone. We know what animals it's from. We see a transition from kosher to non-kosher diet in various strata as we move in between. In the Bar Ilan excavation in the 1980s, they excavated a large bone deposit, what we call a fabisa. And in that fabisa, was full of pottery from the period of the tabernacle. And the majority of the bones are from the right side of the animal. Now, of course, this becomes very interesting because Leviticus 7 says that the priest's portion is the right side. And so we're not talking about just a few bones. We're talking about, a large number of bones. There has to be an explanation. And if someone's got one better than Leviticus 7, I'd like to hear it,
Right. So you could have just found Eli's portion, basically.
Yeah. So if you take the bones and the pomegranate, the altar horns, the storage rooms, we're beginning to get a picture emerging of a tabernacle culture that's operating there at the time that the Bible says that it was operating. Mm-hmm. We have a monumental building that orients east-west that we're in the process of excavating that could also be related to the tabernacle.
Now, I'm not sure, in the Bible, after the tabernacle moves on from Shiloh, Shiloh sort of falls off the center stage. So what kind of occupation levels are you finding after the time of the tabernacle? Do they continue to live there? I know there's in Shiloh now.
There is there's a destruction layer, and we have clearly identified the Philistine destruction of Shiloh, which is implied in the Bible, but it's not explicitly mentioned. And so we have it very clearly. We were able to carbon date it, and the pottery dates, I mean, it matches just what I expected it to be, about 1075 BC. And I think that's the Philistine destruction.
Okay, that would be from the Philistines then.
Yeah, so that's when the ark is captured. So it goes to the battle at Aphek, at Ebenezer. It's captured by the Philistines, and apparently at that same time they come back and destroy Shiloh. And that gives us that destruction layer. So then from there we can date relatively what's above that destruction and what's beneath that destruction. But it is rebuilt rather quickly after that, because we have actually more Iron II pottery than we have Iron I pottery. And this is something we were able to clarify, because in the Bar Ilan Finkelstein excavation, they reported the opposite, that it looked like it wasn't occupied afterward, or so it was just a squatter occupation, because the Bible does talk about a prophet living there, Ahijah, and Jeroboam's wife going to Shiloh and talking to the prophet there. And so there are some mentions. And my favorite one being Jeremiah 7:12, go now to Shiloh and see what I did there, where I first caused my name to dwell. So it is occupied throughout Iron II and then into the late Second Temple period. The largest period of occupation is actually the 1st century AD, or what we would call the early Roman period, up to the end of the Second Temple period. It's heavily occupied.
The Jewish population that was
Very
there.
definitely. And we know that from the stone vessels, from the coins, from the bones, from the kosher diet and
Were
inscriptions and so forth.
mikvot there? Were there any?
Yes, and we also have mikvot.
Okay. And is there a Roman destruction evidence as well?
Shiloh does not experience a destruction apparently at the hands of the Romans. So we don't know if that means that they, at least not that we've identified yet. We don't know if they acquiesced or abandoned or whatever. At Khirbet el-Maqader, we do have a destruction from the Vespasian assault, during the first revolt.
So there's a long story to tell. You have to build all of these stories. If you're the main guy excavating Shiloh, then you're going to have to tell every story, not just the tabernacle as well.
True. I mean, you do sort of have to think comprehensively to get the whole picture.
Right. Everyone wants to know that one certain time period, but there's a lot of time periods to shed light on.
And even the Christian period's interesting. We've got 5 Byzantine churches on the side, and we've got inscriptions in them, and one of them mentions actually the name Shiloh in the inscription.
Which is a luxury not every archaeologist has, that you can
That's right.
go to sleep at night knowing at least you've got the place right, no matter what. Well, so there's just a long historical memory about Shiloh too, however that translated throughout the centuries. I mean, including that you and I are sitting here talking about Shiloh today and how exciting that this is just a place that never fell out of memory in terms of its importance.
Well, I mean, it's first capital, right?
Exactly. Longer than America's been in existence. That was the capital of Israel. Was that?
Well, I mean, God says it's his first love. I mean, he's saying to Jerusalem, don't think I won't treat you, won't cause you to suffer for your sins. Look at Shiloh. I mean, where I first caused my name to dwell. So it's always going to be a special place.
Right. So you've had 3, this would have been your 4th season. Are you averaging 200 volunteers each season, or is that?
No, I'd say it has built up. This would have been our largest group this year, but we'll have somewhere but 100, 125, 150, and then we were expecting just this massive group this last year, and so we're hoping that will be the case in 2021.
I know you hate to see any loss of momentum for something like that. So how do people volunteer? How do they find out how to physically be a part of this first?
A lot of people are pleased to find out that they can volunteer. I mean, we take folks, they can just through our website, which is digshiloh.org, contact us, and or they can find me on my website, scottstripling.net, or through you, they can contact me, and then we'll get them involved in the whole process. And we do on-the-job training. They don't need any experience at all. We take people of all ages, and I often say that I prefer older volunteers because they're already accustomed to pain and suffering, and so they seem to do better on the dig.
Do people come with their teenagers?
Oh yeah, we have people from 12 to 86 last season, and some of the older folks are enormously helpful, and we have things for everyone to do of different physical levels, like since we wet sift, Shelley, we're the only excavation that in the field wet sifts 100% of what we do. So we have a big wet sifting station, and it's all in the shade. So it's very important to our goals, but it's not like dangerous. They're not on level ground, and they're not out in the sun all day. So we've got things that are of all different ability levels.
And do you actually need that many volunteers? It's not as if you're babysitting everyone.
Oh no, I can use an unlimited number because I've got our system that we have created. It's a little different from the Israeli system, but we have a hierarchy, and so each square has its own trained supervisor, and then an assistant supervisor, and then a team of volunteers, anywhere from 5 to 10 working in that square. And so because of sort of like Moses and Jethro came up with that hierarchy idea, having that sort of a system, we're pretty much unlimited in what we can do.
And it sounds like, I mean, this is an expensive undertaking. If you're the one doing the most wet sifting, I mean, people, if anyone out there has been to the Temple Mount sifting project, you know what a big undertaking that is. And it's not just hoses and water. These aren't, this isn't easy to make this kind of construction. So lots of people can just, if they can't physically come, they can donate and it'll go towards things like wet sifting. And what else?
Okay, so we have, I mean, the two things that make an excavation go are money and volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they can't volunteer and they can donate, that's a huge help, because all of our tools, the cost of fuel, you know, the vehicles that we have to rent, the maintenance of our wet sifting station, I mean, all of that's, you can imagine, adds up. Altogether, maybe our budget is $250,000. So we have to raise most of that. It's through donations. We don't have a university. I mean, we do have a number of universities that are part of our consortium, but not like a foundation or something that funds what we're doing. I do it the evangelical way. I beg for money. So my friends and family, you know, that's the cost of being my friend.
Right. So do they donate through, I mean, I'll add in the notes here how to take donations, but it can be through Dig Shiloh, but that ultimately is also donating to Associates for Biblical Research.
Yes, it's through ABR. So the donations to our dig will go through ABR.
Right. Because I don't know if geographically everyone can picture that when you're talking about fuel and transportation, you can't stay at Shiloh. Y'all are staying in Jerusalem and having to transport over each day. So
right. And so we've got, you know, the big bus that's moving volunteers, but we also have to have a vehicle of our own so we can, you know, be moving around all the time in case of emergencies and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so you can just imagine the types of things. So I'm responsible for 200 people. You know how often I'm in the emergency room while I'm in Israel? Several times a week, believe it or not. You know, you have that many people, you've got situations that are going on. So
as anyone who's ever even been on an Israeli tour knows that to be true, much less actually digging in the heat. But but this isn't, it's not a place that's so conducive. You're not staying in tents. You're also not staying where I like to stay. You're not staying in the Oriental in Jerusalem.
No, we're at a nice hotel, but not every hotel wants a dig operating out of it because, let's face it, we're dirty.
Yes.
But we're in East Jerusalem at a nice hotel there, and it's easier for us to get in and out of the city. But volunteers, when they have free time, they can walk into the old city and kick around. And we're right next to the Albright and the Rockefeller, and so there's all kinds of stuff to do.
Yeah, because when should you not just be outside of the old city of Jerusalem? It makes for a delightful couple of weeks. Well, I hope, I mean, I really hope that this generates interest. I know a lot of people out there probably just feeling very non-committal in life in 2020. So I'm sure that's going to be one of your biggest obstacles is just getting commitments. But
yeah,
I mean, but it's got to happen. Archaeology it can take a year off. I don't want it to take 2 years off.
I mean, since the world wars, I mean, you haven't had a big break. The Intifada, you know, that affected some digs, like in the West Bank, especially. Mm-hmm. But I mean, since the world wars, we would have had more than 1 year off. So we certainly are not anticipating that. The country's supposed to reopen in October, flights, and I think their numbers are trending now in the right direction as well. And I'm planning a December trip, and then I'm leading a March tour, and then, you know, May and June. So if all goes well, I'll be three different times I'll be there later this year.
Have you ever bothered to count up how many times you've been to Israel? Have you ever?
Did you lose track? I really did. Somewhere along the way, I just was having so much fun that I lost track.
Yeah, I know some people keep track of that, and I always think, oh, I wish I maybe started that a while back.
Or which airline I've flown, because I've flown every imaginable airline.
Just whoever's cheapest. That's
it.
We flew Aeroflot last time, though, and I wouldn't say I recommend it. The second we flew through the Moscow airport, our credit card numbers were stolen. So I don't know if that relates, but it seems like it might. But anyways, well, I certainly plan on being there and documenting all this, because no matter what, if you have boots on the ground in 2021, which I know you will, this is going to be one of the biggest excavation seasons at Shiloh. I mean, in terms of what you're anticipating, right?
Well, if we find what I think we have, which I can't say, then it's going to be a really big season for us.
Okay. So yeah, so you don't want
We're
to miss.
close.
Who wants to miss that? Thank you, Dr. Stripling, so much. I know I'll be seeing you at class soon, but I really hope that people get involved, and I'll put all of the information in this, links to ABR, links to Dig Shiloh, and just to your Facebook too, so that people can message you with their angsty questions in 2020. But
I appreciate all your good work.
thank you. All right, we'll be in touch.
God bless. Bye-bye.